So when did games go woke? I don't know. It's kind of interesting how you can be not thinking about something at all. It just doesn't seem like it's an issue. And then you get this feeling that something doesn't quite seem right, but you think maybe you're imagining it. Maybe it was just a once-off. Maybe if you ignore it, it'll go away. For example, I remember when New World came out, Amazon's infamous MMO, a game which is very beautiful. The world is beautiful. The environment is beautiful. The gathering mechanics are fun. There's so much to like about New World. But one of the things that I don't like about New World is the fact that its character creator is probably among the worst I've ever seen. And I remember loading into the game for the first time and seeing the character creator and thinking, this is terrible. You couldn't make a character that didn't look more or less like a guy. You couldn't create a good-looking female character in the game. It just looked like they had these universal character bodies where everybody had the same body, and then you could kind of customize hairstyle on top of that framework, which was hulky and looked like a dude more or less. And so it turns out, if you play New World, all of the characters pretty much look like guys. Even the female characters look like guys. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just imagining it. Maybe they tried to make a good character creator and somehow they just sort of missed the mark. And it was innocent. But then there's the option to have weird colored hair in there. So you kind of think that's kind of strange that you couldn't make a quality character creator, but you remembered the blue hair option. Okay. For a game set in a colonial Spain sort of time frame, I'm pretty sure blue hair wasn't part of the look of that time period. So if we're trying to just be a little bit drab because, you know, historical authenticity, that'd be okay. But then there's flashy stuff that doesn't really look period accurate too, so it can't be that. And then you get a little further in and you see the pronoun selector. And you say, huh, okay. You know? So you can't make a character that looks like a woman, but you can select, I guess, female pronouns for your character that looks like a guy. You know? And then I've read different things on message boards, and I see a lot of posts from female players who also noticed this. And you start to realize maybe this is actually part of some peculiar sort of an agenda. Something that I don't really like. And then you play the game. Well, I played the game and I thought it was pretty fun. If I didn't think it was fun, I wouldn't have sunk 600 hours into New World. And I will continue to advocate for that game because I think there's a lot of good things about it. But the character design wasn't one of them. And then throughout the entire game, I had this feeling that something just seemed a little bit off. the lore of the world didn't feel personal. There was something soulless about that game, because it felt like at every turn, if there was an opportunity to represent what it really would have meant to be part of the historical period that is represented in the game, the safest and most generic option possible is what the developers went with. They didn't want to offend anyone, so they created things that looked a little bit like certain themes from specific cultures or history, but they didn't go far enough to do anything that could possibly be controversial. And it's kind of hard to represent something that's inspired by reality if you're offended by that reality. And yet, again, there's that temptation to look at this and say, well, maybe I just kind of imagined it. Maybe it's a once-off. But then it's something that just keeps happening. You see more and more games, TV shows, movies, where it seems like there's some sort of an agenda being pushed, and that agenda is not to entertain a mainstream audience. Because when you consider the reality that a majority of the players of games are men, and a majority of those players are straight men, then it stands to reason, as it has always been, that straight male players probably like to see sexy female characters in the games that they play. So when that's something that you stop seeing in games, and then you start seeing things, as we see today, where it's becoming very clear and apparent, companies like Microsoft saying, well, we don't want our developers to represent female characters in a exaggerated or sexualized way. Okay, so how do you define that? Like, where's the cutoff? Where's that demarcation line? Because, you know, I guess you could say we're going to put a limit on breast size, or I don't know, maybe you just take it all the way and say we're not going to even allow women to be in games anymore. Or more accurately, you can have female characters in a game, but they're not going to look like women, because we're now offended by the concept that women are different than men. And all of this stuff then gets into political contention, which is the trademark of our times, and everyone's arguing about this stuff. But the reality is most people don't care about it. That's the bottom line. Most people just want to have a good time. And so what we see is not inclusion in the sense that we're giving people more freedom to express their unique play styles, unique interests, unique identities. We're putting a censor on anything that is popular in the mainstream so that we can cater to a niche. And that's what woke really refers to. Now, I don't know that woke is the best of terms, but it's become a very popular term. It's become a term everyone recognizes. So, what exactly does woke mean? Like, where does this kind of weird word get its origin? And I think probably what it comes from is Awakening, and more specifically, the Great Awakening. This happened back in 1730. Back at that time, you had the Age of Enlightenment. It was a time of scientific progress. It was a time when rational thinking was prevailing over religious tradition. And religious purists in the pre-American British colonies of that time didn't want any part of that. They were threatened by the fact that the mainstream was going more toward the center, and their traditional religious sensibilities were being undermined. So there was this overwhelming desire for evangelism and revival in the Christian communities of that time. It was a desire to go out there, find anyone who is not on the straight and narrow path, and force them one way or the other, using the threat of hell, to get back in line. And there were positives that came out of the Great Awakening. A lot of the best preachers in the Christian faith came out of that time period. And it is a relevant part of Western culture to this day. But what we see in today's left progressive community is essentially that same type of a desire to force a great awakening, to go against the grain of what is perceived as the establishment, as traditional values, mainstream interests, and to say, we're going to tell you how it's going to be, and you're going to get on board because we are foundationally right. And anytime a group gets the idea that they're not only right, but everyone else has to agree, and if anyone doesn't want to get on board, they need to be threatened or in some way forced out of society through censorship or some other control. That's not really a liberal or progressive attitude at all. It's a form of totalitarianism. It's a form of prudishness. It's a form of not wanting to allow society to determine what is in its own best interest, because instead of listening to what people say they want, we're going to tell them what they should want, and then we're going to deprive them of the ability to choose anything else. And that's something I think we should oppose, whether it's coming from a religious organization or a secular one. We should have freedom to choose what we want. And the truth is that mainstream interests, the things which appeal to the average person, should be what guides the artistic and design objectives of products which are marketed to the mainstream. There's a saying that the customer is always right, and that's something I've heard many, many times in the context of retail. The interesting thing is it's only part of a broader quote which actually went like this: the customer is always right in terms of, in matters of taste. That's what it was. The customer is always right in matters of taste. In other words, you have to produce a product which appeals to the customer, to the average customer. Because if you produce a product that the average customer doesn't like, they're not going to buy it. That doesn't mean that no one is going to buy it, but the average customer isn't going to buy it. And if you continue to be tone deaf and ignore the average customer because you have a product which you think customers should want, and you're going to force that on them, it's just not going to work in the end, and the customer will prevail, because you can't force the average customer to want something that doesn't align with their values or their needs. So that quote is really all about making an effort to have a system of design and to sell a product which aligns with consumer demand. It was never about a Karen at the customer service area demanding some small thing and then saying, well, the customer is always right, and this $500 item was sitting on a spot where there was a $50 price tag, therefore I should have it for $50 because the customer is always right. Or I ate this rotisserie chicken and I didn't like it, so now I want my money back even though I ate the entire thing. Well, that's not really the point of what a customer's always right was really supposed to be talking about. It was talking about delivering products that customers as a broad whole desire. And the consequence is that if you ignore that, at some point, you're going to lose your customers. And I was thinking about this when I look at a Steam sale and I see Tomb Raider 95% off. So I can get $200 worth of Tomb Raider games with add-ons and everything for all of $13. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Great opportunity to experience a franchise that I haven't played before. But it's one of the all-time greats, so of course I probably should. And these are games that people have enjoyed. And they're basically being given away free. And I think the reason why they are is because there is an effort on the table to create a new Tomb Raider game. But the feedback in the community is that this new Tomb Raider game is probably going to be another example of a DEI-infused product that is tone deaf when it comes to the interests of the established community of the game. And it's going to be probably another game that is part of a beloved franchise, but not well received by the fans of that franchise. Another example of creating a sequel to something great and then using the established IP as a tool for detracting from the things that made it great to begin with. And I'm not really a big fan of any of that. The truth is, there's so many good games to play, so many different ways we can spend our time. It's probably better to just get the great games on a Steam sale and then keep on playing the games that already were proven to be amazing, even if they are 5 or 10 years old. Because there was a time when games, movies, when everything was made with a fundamental desire to sell copies to people by giving them what they wanted. And if the average customer wanted to see attractive female characters, and that's what was going to be plastered all over the box art. And I don't think a lot of people care about the pronoun selector, you know? Like, that's just the reality. I don't think that they do. I'm sure there's a few, but certainly not the majority. And I also think it's interesting how when you look at arguments over things like character design, even when you look at the communities themselves, that, you know, like the LGBT community, well, you know, do they want ugly characters? I'm going to say no. And, you know, I have one example of this. I'm going to tell you one reason I'm not that much into Final Fantasy 14 is because their community is so weird. And, you know, I'm not going to be trying to be rude to anybody, but playing that game, just start to realize there's so many weird kind of people that are into strange sexual sort of stuff in that game. So they want to have ERP sort of situations where people are having strange, different erotic chats in their private guilds and all of that kind of stuff, right? And like, that's the rave in this game, to the point where, like, that's the reputation the game starts to have. Like, that's what people are doing in there. Like, they're not even playing the game. They are doing weird, kinky roleplay stuff all the time. And, well, okay. I mean, if that's what player housing is for, okay, that's cool. I don't really mind it. In fact, I actually think it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool because it proves that the community has depth to it, right? People view the game as a place to immerse themselves in versus just a game where, you know, like an arcade game where you're just, you know, shooting monsters and that's all there is to it. So it's cool to see the depth of the community. But I'll tell you the other thing, though. Final Fantasy 14 has a nice character creator. It's not censored. It's not overtly trying to push any kind of an agenda. But there's a lot of different options in terms of what you could do with the game's character creator. So that's a good example of a game that's very inclusive of all different play styles, whether they're strange, alternative type play styles, or maybe more legacy players that just play the game, you know, like a normal person would. It's a game that probably would be fine for anybody. Like, the real reason, biggest reason I don't play Final Fantasy 14 is because I really don't like the fact that the game doesn't feel like it has a open world that you can traverse and explore freely. Like, that's the biggest reason why I don't play that game. But there's things I like about it. And I think it's a good example of how you can have a game with a thriving, probably the biggest LGBTQ community in gaming, maybe even. Certainly they love that game. A lot of them do. But it's a game that doesn't feel like it's trying to push any kind of an agenda down anyone's throat. It's a game that's fine for any player to enjoy. So then you see some game where the average player is just, you know, straight guys who want a good game, and they got pronoun selectors in there, and that's the first thing. And there's like a missing character creator, but there's a pronoun selector there, you know, and you can pretend that it's just a once-off, but the reality is it starts to be more and more common that this is an agenda. It's something which is not a once-off. It's something which is deliberate. And there's a lot of people in the communities that produce products which are retail products ultimately sold to customers who they do detest their core customer base. And you know, it's kind of like somebody who, if you've ever gone to church and you're not a religious person, you go to church and then people find out you don't believe exactly what they believe, and so they basically say something along the lines of, we love you, we care about you, and you need to believe what we believe, because if you don't, you're gonna burn in hell. Okay, thank you. Now, it's kind of hard for me to want to go back, because despite all of your efforts to say that you are very inclusive and you're accepting, the reality is you're only inclusive because you think that if you say you're inclusive, you can get more people to jump on your bandwagon, to believe what you believe, to want what you want them to want. That's why you're inclusive of them. You're inclusive of them because you think you can save them. You think you can redeem them. You think you can subject them to some sort of a new revival. And the truth of the matter is, we aren't really looking for a political movement when we sit down to play our favorite games. We're looking for something that's beautiful, something that's a freely interpretive experience, something where maybe you could explore serious topics through an unserious medium. But not things that push an agenda down your throat and tell you how you need to interpret the experience you're having. For example, in Elder Scrolls, there's a lot of religious symbolism in that game. A lot of the fictional religions in Elder Scrolls are actually inspired by real-world faith. And that's something which I love about the Elder Scrolls. But at no point does the game make me feel like I need to convert to some particular religion because the game is trying to evangelize me. There's games like Age of Empires, which explore all sorts of historical civilizations. They're historically accurate. And if you're a fan of the British Empire, then you might always play as the British. But they aren't trying to force you to interpret some particular part of history, political group, or nationality in a preachy way. It's just giving you a toolkit and allowing you to figure out how you want to interact with it. So more options are great. I'm not opposed to having more options, and I'm not opposed to niche titles which appeal to a small customer base by giving them a product that isn't mainstream. That's fine too. But if you create a product which is designed for a niche crowd, you have to accept the fact that a smaller group of customers are going to be buying that because it doesn't reflect the interests of everyone. And that's where the fundamental problem comes with agendas that we see pushed on us. It's the fact that things which are mainstream interests are hijacked for the purpose of preaching a message which only applies to a very small group of people. But because the medium is something which is already established, there's a captive audience who's expected to just sit there and listen to it, eat it up, absorb it, and accept the new deal. Because what they'll say is, if you don't like it, don't play it. Well, You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of something that happens a lot on Facebook, where people will create a fake account. They will go and find somebody's profile. They'll steal and copy a few of their family pictures, a few of their personal photographs, and then they'll create a duplicate profile that looks like the person they just copied. And then they will go down the list and try to add as many of that person's friends as possible. And people will see that they're getting another friend request from somebody who appears to be a person they know, somebody who they potentially already are friends with, and they'll accept it, not really thinking too much into it. And then, after a while, you have this fake profile, which has a whole bunch of friends who don't realize that the person that they have on their friend list is actually a fake account. After a while, you have potentially built up a sizable number of friends for this fake Facebook profile. And then, at that point, they'll sell that profile, change the branding on it, and now you have this profile that already has followers. And you can use it to try to publicize some entirely unrelated content. And that's something that happens a lot. You have a captive audience, you change the message, and now you have a whole bunch of followers. So imagine if I have a Facebook group. Maybe this is a better example. Imagine I have a Facebook group for the Elder Scrolls Online. It's the biggest Elder Scrolls Online Facebook group out there. And then one day I decide I want it to be about Black Desert Online. So what do? Change the banner at the top of the page, change the name of the group, and now you have, 30,000 members of a group that are all Elder Scrolls Online fans. Only thing is, now it's the official Black Desert group. Would people mind? Would people like that? Probably not. People wouldn't like it, not because they have a problem with the other game, but because they didn't join the group because they were fans of that game. They joined the group because they wanted a specific type of experience that was implied to be the mission statement of that group. And then it got changed. And it was a trick. And that's the bottom line. It's a trick. So if you take something like Tomb Raider, and then you completely reimagine what that character of Lara Croft is going to be, and you inject modern political agendas into it. Okay, well, people did like Tomb Raider. They did like Lara Croft. That doesn't mean they're going to like whatever new thing you're cooking up. Or Elder Scrolls Online. I love the world. I love the lore. I love a whole bunch of things about it. And then we get the news that there's going to be a new companion, and it's going to be a non-binary elf voiced by a non-binary person. Like, okay. So, I might like the Elder Scrolls, but that doesn't mean I like that. And if you keep on pushing that kind of thing, at some point, I start to reach the conclusion that the game isn't about what it used to be about. It's about something new. And then there's always going to be the apologists, the people who go out and they say, well, you're just reading too much into this. You're saying that this doesn't align with the brand, but really it's always been like that. And you know what, to people like that, here's what I have to say, and I'll close with this. Sometimes a spade is just a spade. If it looks like something, that's exactly what it is. And far too often, we will catch drift of something and we'll say, I wonder if this is what it looks like. And then we'll think, well, maybe maybe it's not, right? Like maybe I just imagined this wrong. Like maybe it's not what I thought it was. And we'll dismiss what we believed we saw. But the reality is, it's exactly what it appeared. And our first instinct is often correct. That's just it. So, yeah, you can say you're just imagining it when it seems like messaging in some particular game or media is a little bit off. But the reality is you're probably not imagining it. It probably is exactly what it looks like. And when people tell you that it's not, even though it looks a lot like it is, well, you know what? They can believe what they want, ultimately. But we can always vote with our dollars. And I think that's what it boils down to. When you get tired of the way you are treated in some particular situation, or if as a customer you feel like the product doesn't align with what you want to buy, you can always just not play it, not buy it, and instead put your time and your effort into something you really do enjoy. Something that doesn't feel like it has a twinge of agenda or controversy tied to it. That's one reason why I'll tell you I have liked Black Desert Online. Is it a perfect game? No, it's not. But it feels like it's pretty much on brand, being true to itself. Black Desert Online hasn't really tried to reinvent itself. As a matter of fact, there was I believe a recent interview with developers of Black Desert Online, and one thing that they had said was that they don't really try to chase trends. They essentially create a game and then they let it be what it is. Some people will like it, some people will not like it, but they aren't really trying to reinvent themselves to be something they're not, or to make their product something that it never has been. And I think that that's important. I think it's important anytime you have an established franchise to be true to yourself first, and not to say, well, how can we take this franchise, then take our awakened sensibilities and use this existing IP as a tool for progressing a narrative that it has never really been about. And I think it's also important to say it's not just about gender politics. It's about more than just that. Because anytime you have a problem with an agenda being at the forefront of an organization's core principles and design philosophy, that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. Not just one particular thing. And so you can patch over that one thing that is an example of a pain point, but if there's sort of a cancer at work below the surface, it doesn't really matter. Because even if you figure out how to, put lipstick on a pig, it's still going to be a pig. It's still going to be people who are out of touch and tone deaf and aren't interested in hearing or seeing the interests of their core customers. And if that's how they are, then there comes a point where maybe the best thing you can do is to move on and find someone else who actually does listen, who does care, and who does pay attention to the interests of their customers. Another thing that really stands out is this notion of, well, we didn't know. Well, we didn't know that our customers didn't like this stuff. That tends to be an excuse in one form or another, which winds up being thrown out there. When it gets to the point where it's undeniable that bad design philosophy actually costs companies money, at some point they will backpedal and they'll say, well, we didn't know. Politicians do it, companies do it, game studios do it, people do it in general. Then they try to play innocent and try to act like they had good intentions all along and they just didn't realize that they were making a mistake. Well, the reality is you can always tell. You can always read the room if you care to know what your audience is interested in. So playing ignorant and acting like, well, we just didn't know. No, you did. Far too often people want to act like they don't know, when reality is they did not care to know. Just like people in a corporate boardroom that say, well, let's cut payroll here and there, let's shave here and there so we can deliver shareholder value, and then let's avoid actually going out in the field to see what's happening with the business because we don't want to see anything that doesn't align with our message, which is that everything is fine. If that's your philosophy, you don't want to see the truth, you don't want to see anything that doesn't align with your narrative that things are going well, you can't act like it's a surprise. Eventually, when the rubber meets the road and you have to face reality, that placing an agenda over the average customer's interests is not a good philosophy. And the other truth here is that people who have a philosophy that they don't want to put customers first tend to attract more people that don't want to put customers first. And that can spread like a cancer, because eventually you have a whole team full of people who just want to take care of each other, and they view customers as basically a problem. And once you have that attitude, it's kind of like a job you hate. If you hate your job so much that you have nothing good to say about it, all you ever do is talk about how much you hate your job, then maybe at some point you need to walk away, because you're not going to be able to do a good job if all you have is negative things to say about it. So, should we be negative all the time? No, probably not. But should we continue to consume things which don't sit well with us? I would say no. It's just like that one trip to a bad buffet. You go there, you pick around, you eat the cold food, you figure out how to have a good experience because you know what? You already paid the $15 to get in. And then after that, you never go back, because there's a lot of restaurants in town and you do not have to continue to eat garbage. So always vote with your money, vote with your time, and spend both on things that you truly love, which make you feel valued. True whether we're talking about a game, whether we're talking about a job, whether we're talking about a relationship. As always, good luck on your adventure, and I would love to hear, one way or the other, your thoughts on this. Till next time, thanks for watching.